So, gentle beings, I am delighted to welcome you, new and old alike. Tonight, we have a change of format. This is the first in a round of philosophical bouts where we start with a short debate. After which, we'll split up into small groups to discuss the topic. Tonight, we put metaphysics on trial. In the blue corner, you can decide if he is the charlatan from the city or the Allgate annihilator of abject arguments. I give you Roger, the philosopher for the prosecution. In the red corner, we have the bruiser from Bethnal Green, the East End, exterminator of absolute explanations. I give you Jake, the philosopher for the defense.
Yay! Thanks, buddy.
In essence, I give you two feuding philosophers. Each of them will have up to 4 minutes to give you their initial opening arguments and have up to 3 minutes for their rebuttals. Philosophers, please respect the court. I invite the philosopher for the prosecution to give their opening statement. Over to Roger.
Thank you, Annie. So first of all, we have to say where this term metaphysics originated. Of course, it comes from Aristotle. Try not to make too much noise in the background, please, people. So this notion of metaphysics comes from Aristotle. It simply means after or beyond physics. That just happened to be the chapter in his book that came after physics. So this is where the whole thing began.
Make noise, make noise.
So Aristotle described it as the study of being in general, or knowledge of being in general. And this is to do not with any particular sphere of study, such as biology, but why do we have existence at all? Why does anything exist? And how do we come to know that anything exists? We now use the term ontology to discuss this notion of being or existence. And we use the term epistemology to describe attempts of knowledge of being in general. Many will think of metaphysics as the study of those things beyond the appearance of the physical world, very often to some truth obscured in some occult world, as with the Neoplatonists, i.e. that we have this physical world of bodies and the metaphysical world of souls. Philosophers may think here of Plato's theories of forms, literature students of Donne's metaphysical poetry. Think, for example, of Donne's love poems. Love's mysteries in souls do grow, but yet the body is his book. For Donne and others of his ilk, the union of the two parts of the self was central to his understanding of life. We see an echo of this in the two parts that Descartes describes as mutually incompatible, the mind and body, and therefore sending Western philosophy into a barren cul-de-sac where it lingered unnecessarily for many centuries. I'm sure it will not surprise you to hear me say I follow, in their different ways, the rejection of dualism and idealism from thinkers such as Nietzsche and Marx. I am quite simply a non-dualist who sees no utility or truth in attributing powers to occult forces we cannot perceive. However, not only do I want to defenestrate the dual metaphysics of the Neoplatonics, I can simply see no use for the label metaphysics in modern discourse. We have much better, or shall I say less contradictory labels for the topics Aristotle outlined. The study of being in general, we now call ontology, and the study of how we come to know about it, we call epistemology. These are clear, unambiguous labels that don't infer the existence of souls or forms. I haven't, by the way, heard of any ontological love poems, but no doubt somebody will do, perhaps basing it on Heidegger. For example, with regard to Marx, he clearly attacked the German ideology of idealism from a metaphysical perspective. And some would say that he had his own metaphysic, while others would say that he was anti-metaphysical. However, both could agree that he has a materialist ontology. So not only do I want to put the ghostly occult entities on a small boat to the river Styx, I also want to retire the label, the word metaphysics, as this is simply redundant, its job being much more efficiently and less ambiguously done by the labels ontology and epistemology. Indeed, I can't think of any philosophical discussion that would be prevented if we cancelled the term. This, I think, proves that it is unnecessary. If I can misappropriate Occam's razor for a moment, is the idea that entities are not to be multiplied beyond necessity. If there is no necessity for this term metaphysics, then I think, gentle beings of the philosophical jury, that we have proved our case for euthanizing this superannuated concept which has been in its dotage for 500 years.
Thank you, Roger, and indeed a time conformist well within the time limit. And now hand you over to Jake.
4 minutes, is it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, 4 minutes. Yeah, good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, philosophers. We've just heard from our dear friend Roger over here. He's fantastic, cuts a good shape on the dance floor, and he can whisper sweet nothings in someone's ear. What he's failed to do is provide any really good reason why you should actually be ditching metaphysics in the first place. And it is my task today, in the very brief time I have, to try and persuade you that indeed metaphysics is alive and well. So, a brief definition of metaphysics, I think, it's the study of the world and reality in the most general sense, possible. Similar to science, also studies the same thing, but crucially, metaphysics won't be going out there doing experiments. It's fundamentally non-empirical in nature. But where it differs from religion, on the other hand, which also seeks to describe the world, is it's rational. So you're going to start off with sketching out the intellectual landscape, the conceptual landscape, identify the various positions, and then what you do is you see where reasoned argument will take you. It may take you one way, may take you another way, and that's the basis on which you actually argue your position. So it's not dogmatic in that sense. I think probably the best thing to do, rather than talking about metaphysics in the abstract, or meta-metaphysics, is for us to actually just roll up our hands and get our feet wet and actually look at a specific example. I'm going to have to cut it down slightly because I thought I had 7 minutes, but I'll give you one example and see where we get to. But as I go through this, let's just be very clear what we want to pay attention to. We're sketching out the different ideas, we're seeing where they go to, and we're not looking to provide actual empirical data. That's just not the way it works in metaphysics, or indeed any area of philosophy generally. And it's also not about, the question is about should we ditch metaphysics, not about is this metaphysical position correct or not. The question is the debate, is the overall subject area a valid subject area? Now, Roger mentioned dualism rather briefly. Cartesian dualism, as we know, it's the position from Descartes where we've got a body and we've got a soul and we've got two fundamentally different substances. The first question that we come to, really, which I remember when I first looked at it many years ago, is the interaction problem. How is it going to be possible for a body which is defined as having 3 dimensions to interact with a soul substance which is fundamentally, as defined by Descartes, not 3-dimensional? Okay, and so Descartes would come back as well. It's that particular part of the brain over there, which of course begs the question of, yes, but how can something fundamentally incorporeal interact with something substantial? Now, from the position of metaphysics, that presents a fundamental problem. There have been some responses to that around the same time. People were very keen to keep that religious theological position. We had this idea of pre-established harmony, which is the idea that we concede that the mind and body don't interact, but they're somehow always in harmony with each other, much like 2 clocks standing next to each other are constantly in synchrony. Now, I think what's interesting about the response is just how very weak it is. Now, I haven't proven to you that there is a soul or there isn't a soul. What I have said is that this presents a significant challenge that is very much something we need to debate. And then, of course, there are other areas such as materialism and panpsychism, which take the debate further forwards. So, in the few seconds I've got left, I'd say that this is a clear illustration, just from one example, that metaphysics is not only shouldn't be ditched, but it's alive and well, and we should go forth and get involved with it. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed, a huge round of applause for our fuming philosophers here. I have to say that both did provide us equally informative aspects of their argument, and of course the first round of initial arguments have been really well received by us, so thank you for that, gentlemen. Now we're going to have another 3 minutes, hence 7 minutes in total, Jake, for our philosophers here to actually have their counter argument time. So it's now time for the rebuttals, so I shall hand over to Roger.
Oh yes, thank you, Jake. You gave a very good illustration of something that's called a metaphysical problem. But if I had banished this term metaphysics, we could just discuss it within the philosophy of mind. My argument ended with, if we got rid of this word metaphysics, would it actually prevent us from discussing these things? The question of mind and body, for example, is one of ontology: what exists, what substances exist, and to some extent, how do we know about this, which is epistemology. So as far as I'm aware, we could have exactly the same discussion but simply not use the term metaphysics. I suppose my position is metaphysics is like a postcode. It just so happens that lots of things are put in it. But it's not necessary. It doesn't need to necessarily exist. It's as though somebody went to Knightsbridge and saw 2 posh department stores and said, this must be the postcode where all the posh department stores are, until they went to Oxford Street and bumped into Selfridges. For me, it's simply a conventional thing. It's not something that is philosophically necessary. By convention, because somebody said something 2,500 years ago, we use this term metaphysics to describe things such as the mind-body problem. But I think because this term metaphysics can be used in, I've outlined 3 ways it could be used, didn't I? The vast majority, when I talk to people in philosophy groups, they're using it instead of ontology. You can talk about the metaphysics of John Donne, which is another thing altogether. And you can talk about the metaphysics of a soul and all this kind of thing. Whereas, as I said, if we were to use terms such as epistemology and ontology, I don't think we would lose anything at all. So I put it to you, philosopher beings of the jury, that if we throw away metaphysics, we get rid of our chains, and we have nothing to lose but confusion.
Oh, well done, Roger. Thank you very much for that. And I now call upon Jake to counter any of the comments that he would like to with regard to Roger's arguments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roger, for that. So essentially, metaphysics is alive and well. It is there. It's just a matter of whether we call it metaphysics. We're going to carry on doing metaphysics nonetheless. It's simply a matter of labels and words. I was assuming that the debate was really about whether metaphysics as a subject is understood is something which we should be ditching altogether. I mean, you speak of ontology. Ontology is a subject within metaphysics, arguably the largest study within metaphysics. There are a few other areas along the side, mereology and so forth. It seems to me that I'm not quite sure where the point of disagreement is. I mean, the word metaphysics seems to be quite useful in terms of dealing with objects. How we understand objects in the real world. Is it whether it's causation, whether it's time, questions of time travel? Is that something that's logically possible? Is it something that's is it something that could happen in principle? These are all the sorts of subjects which don't quite fit into political philosophy or ethics or aesthetics or so forth. I would say that it sounds like we're both in agreement that metaphysics shouldn't be ditched, whether we call it such or not. Thanks.
Okay, well done to both gentlemen, on presenting their arguments and quite interesting rebuttals. So I would like to thank you all for lending your ears forth, and I'm going to now hand you over back to your host, Roger, to continue with the proceedings for this evening.
I would like to thank the referee from Romford. The meticulous, the masterful, the majestic Maharaja of moderation.
Indeed.